get something straight. Nobody made me, nobody owns me, and nobody sure as hell tells me what to do.
The Undertaker has never been afraid to stand up to Vince McMahon. Now he's accusing him of killing Hulk Hogan through decades of ruthless exploitation.
I've had 17 surgeries in the last 10 years.
Oh my God. What's not original here?
The knees are fake, the hips are fake, the back's full of metal, and part of my face is full of metal.
And Hulk isn't the only name he's bringing up. The Undertaker is confronting Vince about the entire trail of fallen wrestlers left in his wake. Let me break it down. How Vince McMahon's system destroyed wrestling's heroes. The wrestling world was shaken on July 24, 2025, when Hulk Hogan died at age 71 from a heart attack. But behind the tributes and public mourning lies a darker truth, one that wrestling insiders have whispered about for decades. According to The Undertaker, what killed Hogan wasn't just cardiac arrest. It was the slow, systematic destruction of bodies and minds, fueled by a culture of brutality, steroid abuse, and psychological warfare, all orchestrated by one man, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. The signs were always there, hidden in plain sight beneath the bright lights and pyrotechnics. Vince McMahon's wrestling culture in WWE has been criticized for prioritizing spectacle, potentially at the cost of wrestler health. For over 4 decades, McMahon built an empire not just on entertainment, but on the broken bodies and shattered minds of the very performers who made him billions.
I didn't get the memo about the fake wrestling.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, I missed that part. You know, it's predetermined. We know who's going to win or lose, but what people don't understand is it's very physical. And back in the day, in the 70s, when I first started, I've still got like teeth marks on my finger.
Hogan himself admitted the brutal physical reality of what McMahon's system demanded. The man who became wrestling's biggest icon was systematically destroying his body from the very beginning, conditioned to see pain and injury as normal parts of the business rather than warning signs of systematic abuse.
My eye reconstructed a couple times from getting hit in the face. Nose broken 13 times. All these teeth, these fake teeth, have been knocked out 6 times. So it's been a wild ride.
This wasn't just the normal wear and tear of athletic competition. This was systematic physical destruction that McMahon's system normalized and even celebrated. Hogan was conditioned to see his body as expendable, a tool to be broken and rebuilt in service of McMahon's entertainment empire. When we examine the systematic health crisis that plagued WWE under McMahon's leadership, a horrifying pattern emerges. It seems likely that steroid use was widespread in the 1980s and 1990s, linked to long-term health issues like heart disease and mental health problems. This wasn't just about enhancing performance, it was about creating an environment where wrestlers felt compelled to sacrifice their long-term health for short-term success. The numbers tell a story that should haunt every wrestling fan. A 2014 study showed wrestlers are 15 times more likely to die from cardiovascular causes and 122 times more likely from drug overdoses compared to the general population. These aren't just statistics, they represent human lives cut short by a system that treated performers as expendable commodities rather than human beings.
I've had 17 surgeries in the last 10 years.
Oh my God. What's not original here?
The knees are fake, the hips are fake, the back's full of metal, and part of my face is full of metal.
Hogan's own body became a monument to McMahon's systematic destruction. 17 surgeries in 10 years. This wasn't just aging. This was the accumulated damage from decades of systematic abuse that McMahon's system had normalized. Every surgery represented another attempt to repair what the wrestling machine had broken. McMahon's empire was built on what can only be described as a culture of fear and physical destruction.
WWE, quote, is a kingdom ruled by fear. It is the motivating factor everywhere. Fear, one writer said.
This fear wasn't just psychological. It extended to the very real terror that speaking up about health concerns, steroid abuse, or unsafe working conditions could end your career instantly.
When you get older, you kind of crunch up a little bit anyway. All those things added up, you know, so it's very, very physical.
There are some wrestlers, and maybe a lot of wrestlers, who deal with this with alcohol and drugs because of pain.
Yeah.
Hogan understood the systematic nature of the problem. The pain wasn't just individual, it was generational, affecting entire cohorts of wrestlers who had been put through McMahon's machine. The alcohol and drug abuse wasn't moral failing. It was a predictable response to systematic physical destruction.
How common is that?
It's very common. When I was wrestling full-time, All of us did.
The admission is stunning in its simplicity. Under McMahon's system, drug abuse wasn't the exception, it was the rule. All of us did. Every performer in McMahon's empire was systematically pushed into pharmaceutical dependence as a way to survive the physical demands of the system.
There was a very heavy layer of fear and tension, and that was directly from Vince. And the culture that he created obviously created a lot of problems. The writers all agreed that the culture of fear spread throughout the company from the writer's room to the road, all the way to the promotion's headquarters, where they all witnessed varying degrees of verbal abuse.
This culture didn't just affect mid-card wrestlers or backstage personnel, it reached the very top of the company, creating an environment where even the biggest stars like Hogan lived in constant anxiety about their position and future. The psychological stress of navigating McMahon's unpredictable demands took a toll that extended far beyond the wrestling ring.
You ever do it?
Yes. Yes.
There was a time you said no.
Yeah, one time.
I've trained 20 years, 2 hours a day to look like I do. But the things that I am not is I'm not a steroid abuser, and I do not use steroids.
Even Hogan's admission of steroid use came wrapped in the psychological conditioning that McMahon's system had instilled. The denial, the rationalization, the attempt to minimize the scope of the abuse, all of it reflects how deeply McMahon's culture had penetrated the minds of his performers.
And actually, when I said no, I wasn't on steroids at the time, so I was playing with words.
Knowing what you've gone through, if you could make a decision again on whether to go into wrestling, having become the Bionic Man, would you do it again?
A running clothesline! There, Macho, go after the eye! Oh, no! That's fire! Plants Hogan!
Oh, yeah. I'll do it all over again.
The most chilling aspect of Hogan's testimony is his continued loyalty to the system that destroyed him. Even after 17 surgeries, even after admitting to systematic steroid abuse, even after becoming what he called the Bionic Man, he would do it all again. This is the ultimate proof of how effectively McMahon's psychological conditioning worked. His victims remained loyal even as the system killed them.
Everybody was getting yelled at all the time in the room, one former writer said. It was more saying stuff, I'm editing myself, that was humiliating or mean, couched as a joke, but it's a nasty joke. If you're being targeted in a room, nobody stands up for you, but that's because if they do, they will get the bullet in the head too.
This culture of silence had deadly consequences for wrestlers like Hogan. When performers suffered injuries, addiction, or health problems, they learned to suffer in silence rather than risk McMahon's wrath. The evidence leans toward significant physical and mental health tolls, including concussions and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, with tragic cases like Chris Benoit highlighting these risks. How McMahon's steroid empire destroyed Hogan's body. To understand how Vince McMahon's system killed Hulk Hogan, we must dive deep into the pharmaceutical nightmare that defined professional wrestling under his reign. This wasn't just about performance enhancement. This was about the systematic poisoning of an entire generation of performers, with Hogan serving as both the poster child for success and the ultimate victim of a machine designed to consume human bodies for profit.
It's hard to believe when you see somebody this big that steroids is not kind of the common drug in the ring.
Okay.
The interviewer's observation cuts to the heart of McMahon's pharmaceutical empire. Hogan's massive physique wasn't natural. It was the product of systematic chemical enhancement that McMahon's system not only tolerated, but demanded. The size that made Hogan famous was also slowly killing him.
You ever do it?
Yes. Yes.
There was a time you said no.
Yeah, one time.
I've trained 20 years, 2 hours a day to look like I do. But the things that I am not is I'm not a steroid abuser, and I do not use steroids.
Hogan's initial denial, even while admitting use, reveals the psychological conditioning that McMahon's system instilled. The distinction between use and abuse was meaningless when the system demanded continuous chemical enhancement to maintain position and relevance. Hogan's death from acute myocardial infarction, with contributing factors including chronic lymphocytic leukemia, represents the final chapter in a story that began decades earlier when McMahon transformed professional wrestling into a pharmaceutical experiment with human subjects. The cardiac arrest that claimed Hogan's life wasn't random. It was the predictable endpoint of systematic steroid abuse that McMahon not only tolerated, but actively encouraged. The systematic nature of McMahon's pharmaceutical empire becomes undeniable when we examine the institutional support for steroid distribution. The 1994 steroid trial revealed that Dr. George Zahorian III, a ringside doctor, had supplied steroids to WWE, specifically to McMahon's office, indicating a systemic issue. This wasn't wrestlers making individual individual choices. This was an institutionalized system of drug distribution operating under McMahon's direct supervision, with Hogan as one of its primary beneficiaries and victims. The scope of McMahon's pharmaceutical empire becomes clear when we examine the systematic health consequences that followed his rise to power. Steroid use has been associated with cardiovascular problems, including heart attacks and strokes, due to increased heart size and impaired pumping ability, leading to arrhythmias and premature cardiac arrest. Hogan's death fits this medical profile perfectly: the enlarged heart, the cardiovascular complications, the premature cardiac failure that marks the end stage of chronic steroid abuse.
I was 6'7" before the Rocky movie.
How tall are you now?
I'm 6'4½".
How could you lose almost 3 inches?
Fast forward 35 years later, dropping a leg drop every night on my spine, 2 knee replacements, 2 hip replacements, 9 back surgeries.
The physical compression of Hogan's body tells the complete story of McMahon's systematic destruction. 3 inches of height lost to spinal compression, multiple joint replacements, 9 back surgeries. This wasn't just the wear and tear of athletic competition. This was the systematic breakdown of a human skeleton under the combined assault of steroid-induced tissue damage and repetitive physical trauma. The death toll from McMahon's pharmaceutical machine reads like a casualty report from a chemical warfare attack. Ultimate Warrior died at 54 from heart failure in 2014. Roddy Piper suffered cardiac arrest at 61 in 2015. And Randy Savage died at 58 with an enlarged heart and 90% artery blockage in 2011. Each name represents not just a statistic, but a human being whose cardiovascular system was systematically destroyed by the same pharmaceutical cocktail that ultimately claimed Hogan's life.
My knees, I've had 3 or 4 surgeries on my knees, each knee before I had them replaced.
What's not original here?
The knees are fake, the hips are fake.
The systematic replacement of Hogan's joints reveals how thoroughly McMahon's system had destroyed his body. These weren't injuries from specific incidents. They were the predictable result of decades of steroid-induced tissue breakdown, combined with the repetitive trauma that McMahon's entertainment machine demanded. But the pharmaceutical nightmare extended far beyond just steroids. Painkiller dependence, often mixed with alcohol, has also contributed to overdoses and deaths. Hogan himself became trapped in this secondary pharmaceutical web, admitting to developing dependence, washing down dozens of pills with alcohol. This wasn't just about managing pain. This was about surviving in an environment that systematically broke down human bodies and then offered more drugs as the only solution. The systematic nature of McMahon's pharmaceutical destruction becomes even clearer when we examine how the organization handled health concerns. WWE's lack of health insurance, noting that as independent contractors, wrestlers lack pensions and health care, leading to degenerating joints, back issues, and required surgeries. This wasn't just corporate negligence, it was a deliberate strategy to avoid responsibility for the pharmaceutical nightmare they had created, while pushing the costs onto the performers themselves. The medical evidence surrounding Hogan's death tells the complete story of McMahon's pharmaceutical destruction. Medical records confirmed he died from acute myocardial infarction, with contributing factors such as a history of atrial fibrillation and chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Each of these conditions has direct links to chronic steroid abuse: the enlarged heart struggling to pump blood, the irregular heartbeat caused by damaged cardiac tissue, and the compromised immune system that allowed cancer to take hold. What makes this even more tragic is how preventable Hogan's death could have been if McMahon had prioritized performer health over pharmaceutical enhancement. The cardiovascular damage that ultimately killed Hogan was entirely predictable and preventable if the focus had been on human health rather than pharmaceutical profits. How McMahon's system consumed its greatest star. The death of Hulk Hogan on July 24, 2025, represents more than just the loss of a wrestling icon. It stands as the ultimate indictment of Vince McMahon's systematic destruction of human lives in service of entertainment profits. When we examine the final years of Hogan's life through his own words and experiences, we see not just the story of one man's decline, but the inevitable conclusion of a system designed to consume its performers completely, body and soul.
Well, I got to a point where everything kind of hit me at the same time. The divorce, my whole world falling apart. Both of the kids were with Linda, and that's how I ended up playing with a gun.
Hogan's admission of suicidal ideation wasn't just about personal problems. It was about the systematic psychological breakdown that McMahon's system inflicted on its biggest stars. The man who had been conditioned for decades to see himself as invincible gradually came to understand that he was broken, expendable, and consumed by the very machine that had created him.
I was to the point where I wanted to kill myself. I sat in my bathroom by myself when my ex-wife was gone and the kids were gone, and I was completely broken and destroyed, and I said, what's the easiest way out of this? I mean, I was lost.
You were suicidal.
Yes, I was.
This psychological collapse wasn't just about personal failures or controversies. It was about the systematic dismantling of a human being's sense of self-worth by a system that had never valued him as anything more than a revenue-generating asset. McMahon's empire had built Hogan up not to celebrate his humanity, but to exploit it more effectively. Hogan's death from acute myocardial infarction, with contributing factors including chronic lymphocytic leukemia and atrial fibrillation, tells the complete story of what McMahon's empire ultimately does to human bodies. This wasn't just an elderly man succumbing to natural causes. This was the systematic breakdown of a cardiovascular system that had been pushed beyond its limits for decades.
Well, it leaves me with the people that love me and the people that are loyal to me and the people that have stuck with me all this time. It was probably the worst day of my life when I said that 8 years ago. I bottomed out.
The psychological destruction that McMahon's system inflicted on Hogan was as devastating as the physical damage. The culture of fear, the constant pressure to maintain an impossible standard of perfection, and the systematic dehumanization had reduced the world's most famous wrestler to a broken man contemplating suicide in his bathroom.
I made friends with Layla Ali, and during the day, I had several phone calls. I picked it up and said, hey, we're just checking on you. I want to make sure everything's cool.
The fact that a phone call from Layla Ali potentially saved Hogan's life reveals how completely McMahon's system had isolated him. The man who had been surrounded by millions of fans, countless colleagues, and industry insiders was ultimately alone when he needed human connection most, a direct result of the competitive, fear-based culture that McMahon had created.
And just her saying hello to me and saying, yeah, we're just checking on you, make sure everything's okay. That pretty much woke me up. And in that moment, I said, you know what? There are a lot of good people out there.
So Layla Ali in some way saved your life.
The tragic irony is that it took someone from outside McMahon's wrestling system to provide the human compassion that could have prevented Hogan's suicide. The wrestling industry that had made billions from Hogan's performances had created a culture where genuine human concern was so rare that a simple phone call became life-saving. The systematic nature of McMahon's destruction becomes clear when we examine the accumulated physical damage that Hogan's body had endured. Hogan's later years were marked by health problems, including neck and back surgeries, each surgery a testament to the decades of systematic abuse that McMahon's entertainment machine had demanded. The culture of fear that defined McMahon's empire played a crucial role in preventing Hogan from getting the help he needed.
The mood of Vince McMahon, he always said he gauged whether Vince was in a good mood or a bad mood. He looked at the writers, or he stuck his head in the writers' room, and if they were happy, Vince was in a good mood. If they were sad or pensive or anxious, he knew that Vince McMahon was on a rampage and not to bother Vince.
Even as one of McMahon's biggest stars, Hogan lived in constant anxiety about his position, his future, and his value to the organization. This chronic stress, maintained over decades, contributed directly to the cardiovascular problems that would ultimately claim his life. The human body wasn't designed to operate under constant psychological threat, and Hogan's heart literally gave out under the sustained pressure.
That pop was something.
It was something.
It was a pop.
It was. That was an ego pop.
Lord have mercy. Wonder what you think he went back to the dressing. Well, you were there.
I was there.
What happened? What happened backstage after he came back?
No, when I saw him, he was no-selling it and pushing his beer.
Hogan's final WWE appearance on January 6, 2025, where he was heavily booed by the Los Angeles crowd, represents the ultimate degradation of a man who had given everything to McMahon's empire, only to be discarded when he was no longer profitable. Even The Undertaker couldn't hide his lack of sympathy for Hogan's final humiliation.
I didn't see him. I wasn't backstage when he came.
Did you feel like giving him a hug afterwards?
No.
Here's Taker being a company man right
Right. Did you feel bad for him? No.
The callousness wasn't personal, it was institutional, reflecting how McMahon's system had conditioned even its most successful performers to view each other as competitors rather than fellow human beings deserving of compassion. The Undertaker's lack of sympathy for Hogan's humiliation represents the ultimate success of McMahon's psychological conditioning.
Well, hey man, I got feelings. I got feelings for people. Like, sometimes in life, things come back.
Well, I mean, it's funny that, we were talking about this last night, that, you know, with you know, all the podcasts and all the books and everything, and everybody realizes that Hogan wasn't the guy that he was portrayed to be.
The Undertaker's observation that everybody realizes that Hogan wasn't the guy that he was portrayed to be reveals how McMahon's system had created a false mythology around its performers while systematically destroying the human beings beneath the characters. The real Hogan had been consumed by the machine, leaving only a broken shell performing the role of a hero he had never truly been allowed to be. The medical evidence surrounding Hogan's death provides the final proof of McMahon's systematic destruction. His death following recent surgeries and health struggles wasn't just about aging. It was about a body that had been systematically broken down by decades of pharmaceutical abuse, surgical interventions, and the accumulated stress of life in McMahon's empire. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of Hogan's story is his continued loyalty to the system that destroyed him. Even after 17 surgeries, even after becoming the Bionic Man, even after admitting to systematic steroid abuse and suicidal ideation, he remained psychologically committed to McMahon's machine. This represents the ultimate success of McMahon's conditioning, creating victims who remained grateful for their own destruction. The ultimate tragedy of Hulk Hogan's death is that it was entirely preventable. If McMahon had prioritized performer health over profits, if the culture of fear had been replaced with genuine care for human well-being, if the systematic pharmaceutical abuse had been stopped before it became institutionalized, Hogan could still be alive today. Instead, we're left with the stark reality that Vince McMahon's empire claimed its greatest creation, consuming Hulk Hogan completely and discarding what remained when he was no longer useful. The heart attack that killed Hogan on July 24, 2025 was just the final symptom of a disease that had been eating away at him for decades. The disease of being human in an inhuman system designed by Vince McMahon. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.